President Trump is on his way back from a 4-day official state visit to Japan. He met there with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and became the first foreign leader to meet with Japan's new emperor. The commander-in-chief also visited U.S. troops aboard the USS Wasp.
So during the visit, President Trump addressed North Korea's most recent missile test firing, but broke with his own national security advisor and his host, Prime Minister Abe, who called the rocket launches a violation of UN Security Council resolutions.
I view it differently. All I know is that there have been no nuclear tests. There have been no ballistic missiles going out. There have been no long-range missiles going out. And I think that someday we'll have a deal. I'm not in a rush.
So here to analyze the president's visit and the news that came out of it, Deputy Director for Geoeconomics at the Wilson Center, Shihoko Goto. She's also the Senior Associate for the Northeast Asia Center at Woodrow Wilson Center Asia's program. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So was this a successful visit, Ms. Goto? What do you think?
It's a win-win on the surface, and I say that because on the diplomatic front, it achieved what it's supposed to do. That is to say, it had great visuals, everything that was calculated to the millisecond went well, without a hitch. The meeting with the Prime Minister, of course, the banquet with the Emperor and Empress, the sumo match, all of these things went very well. And in that respect, it was good. It showed that the U.S.-Japan relationship is strong. The two leaders have a good relationship between them personally, and that sends a signal to the region, especially to a common threat to both the United States and Japan, that is to say China. And so this showing of unity is a success. But the question, of course, is what about the policy implications of this? So when we went into this meeting, we had two issues that we really wanted to make some kind of headway. One is on the trade front, and one is on North Korean security as well. We haven't really made any headway, and the question is, has the relation on those two issues better, or are they actually worse?
Dig into the trade piece a little bit. What does Japan want out of a trade deal, and what does the U.S. want?
Right. Well, what the Japanese want is essentially for the United States to abide by the commitments of the TPP. That is to say, they will meet some of the needs in agriculture and in the auto sector and in the manufacturing sector in general, up to that standard that was defined by the TPP. And of course, Japan still remains part of the TPP, which is now the CPTPP. The United States pulled out of it, but it has a lot of interest. There are a lot of issues that the TPP covers that the United States would want. For the United States, the focus is, of course, on reducing the trade deficit in goods. And in particular, the United States wants greater access to the Japanese agricultural market, and it also wants to have a better balance in the auto sector. Now, the auto sector makes up the bulk of the U.S.-Japan trade imbalance at the moment, and it has been for the last 30 years.
So I believe the president addressed the trade issue in Japan when he was over there. Let's take a listen to it.
As far as China is concerned, they want to make a deal. I think they probably wish they made the deal that they had on the table before they tried to renegotiate it. They would like to make a deal. We're not ready to make a deal, and we're taking in tens of billions of dollars of tariffs, and that number could go up very, very substantially, very easily. But I think sometime in the future, China and the United States will absolutely have a great trade deal.
So the president talked about the Chinese trade deal there. He also talked about how there might be a potential trade deal after the Japanese elections.
Right.
Do you think that this will affect Prime Minister Abe's chances in the elections?
Well, the good news for Prime Minister Abe is that this has been postponed until after the election, and so President Trump, the administration, is very cognizant of the fact that a bad deal, a deal that would require Japan to give up some of its interests, would reflect badly on the Prime Minister and therefore impact the election. So postponing it could be seen as a win for Abe himself. But for Japan at large, is this a good deal or not? it actually means that it's simply being postponed, right?
Yeah.
And some of the concerns that Japan has is about agriculture access, and the other one is about tariffs on the auto sector. And so what the United States has done is it's invoked national security, Section 232, as a reason for stopping, increasing tariffs on sectors. And that's already been in place for the steel and aluminum sector. Canada and Mexico have been able to have that lifted, which is a good step towards USMCA. But for Japan, the Section 232 on steel and aluminum still is in play. And now the concern of Japan, as well as the European Union, is that this will be put in place for the auto sector as well. And we know that the United States is looking into postponing it for another 6 months, or reviewing it for another 6 months. But what we hear from Trump during this Japan visit is that this isn't going to change anything, that the possibility of 232 being imposed on the auto sector still remains in play. So when we go back to the Japanese election issue, the Japanese electorate will be like, okay, you've wined and dined him. He's had a good time. He's been able to give a big trophy to a big sumo wrestler. This is great.
Yeah.
You've got all of these great things. Melania had a good time in a restaurant. They played golf, what have you. But what does it mean for Japan? Has Japan been able to serve its economic interests through this relationship? And this question is still a big has it? The question mark remains. And so what's very interesting is that Abe during the press conference talked a great deal about the impact of Japanese investments into the United States. Foreign direct investment to the United States is pretty hefty. Japan is the third biggest provider of FDI into the United States. It's not that the administration is not aware of that, and Japan keeps hammering this information. Companies like Toyota have already expressed concern about the auto tariffs, but that hasn't really changed the dynamic or changed the equation really at all. So this is something that will impact the elections moving forward.
How does the Japanese public feel about President Trump?
Put it this way. The United States is Japan's most important foreign partner in an increasingly insecure region. There's not just the North Korea threat, but there's also the China threat as well, right? And Japan is still very much dependent on the United States for security reasons, and it's a big economic partner as well. And so in that light, Japan has no choice but to accommodate or to have a strong relationship with the United States. And Trump is a very different type of leader that most countries have dealt with. Japan has tried a very different strategy in reaching out to Trump. But I do want to point out that this whole personal diplomacy has not just begun with Trump. We've seen that with Prime Ministers Koizumi, Nakasone, others as well, and to try to cultivate this personal relationship. And in fact, it was probably a little bit difficult to have that kind of personal tie with President Obama, who is much more cerebral and wanted to talk about policy, right?
He's not a warm and fuzzy type.
No, he's not warm and fuzzy, so you have to really appeal to his intellect, whereas Trump is probably the reverse. You really want to appeal to his heart and probably his ego as well.
Yeah.
You pointed out the security issue, because I wasn't going to get that. One of the biggest top line things that came out of that was that the president disagreed with Prime Minister Abe about the nature of the North Korea test missile launch. How does this affect the U.S.-Japan relationship? Because I know, North Korea is one of the top, obviously, you have missiles overflying Japan. This is a very real thing. When you have people waking up in the middle of the night to an alert that a missile has just overflown your country.
Yeah. This isn't an intellectual exercise. The threat is very real. The confusing aspect of this is that there doesn't seem to be a consensus within the United States on how to deal with the North Korea
Even
threat.
within the administration.
Right, even within the administration. So within the United States, people are getting mixed messages. So foreign countries, including Japan, are having a very difficult time trying to grapple with how to deal with US policy vis-a-vis North Korea. What I can say is that, yes, for Japan, North Korea is very much a real threat. Even if the North Koreans were to eliminate or back down on long-range missiles, the fact that they do have short and medium-range missiles remains something that is of deep concern to the Japanese as well. The silver lining in all of this, from a political aspect, is that Trump seems to have understood some of the interest, the great passion that Japan has about the abductee issue.
Right.
You know, the North Koreans abducted some Japanese nationals in the 70s. It's become a very Japanese national cause to have them brought back to Japan, or at least their remains to come back as well. And so Trump has that interest, but that doesn't address the core issue of the security challenge. And so the other dynamic of this is this, that the US security stance in the region is dependent not just on a strong bilateral relationship between Japan and the United States, but it's also with the United States and Korea, and also to complete that triangle, strong relations between Japan and South Korea as well. South Korea-Japan relations are on shaky ground at the moment. The United States is not as committed as it had been to really keep that triangle as solid as it could be. There's a great deal of uncertainty about what the United States is going to do regarding North Korea. So there's a lot of uncertainties up in the air.
Shihoko.
Thank you.
Very interesting to have such in-depth information. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Coming up on Rising, CNN's chief national security correspondent Jim Sciutto explains why you have to look at the Steele dossier as a, quote, tip sheet.
And Defend Our Protectors founder Liz Ullman describes how a budget feud between the Army and the National Guard has left thousands of service members' lives in complete ruins. All of this when Rising continues.